Well, welcome to The Debate. Today we're tackling a pretty terrifying question. What if the only way to save humanity is to permanently destroy the very thing that makes us human?
Wow. Yeah, it is a really brutal premise. I completely agree.
It really is. Today we're looking at Bill Hines. He's the Wallfacer who looked at the incoming Trisolaran threat and, well, he decided that free will was a luxury our species simply couldn't afford anymore.
Right. And I mean, when you are looking at the absolute certainty of total extinction, the rules of peacetime ethics kind of just evaporate. You have to look at what actually keeps a species alive.
Well, in today's discussion, I will be arguing that Hines committed a profound ethical violation. By secretly using his invention, the mental seal, he essentially robbed humanity of its agency and turned people into automatons.
And I'll be arguing that Hines was really a misunderstood pragmatist. His forced escapism was the absolute only logical path to survival in a completely no-win scenario.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective right from the start. We have to look at who this man actually was, because his public persona is vital to understanding the tragedy of what he did.
Oh, absolutely. The context is everything.
Right. So we all know that Wallfacers were given absolute, unquestioned authority to develop these completely secret plans to defeat an alien fleet that was 400 years away. But unlike Manuel Ray Diaz with his obsession with massive nuclear weapons, or, Frederick Tyler with his military fleet strategies.
The military brutes, basically.
Exactly. Bill Hines wasn't a military brute at all. He was this incredibly debonair English neuroscientist, a former president of the European Union, actually.
Yeah, he was the intellectual of the group.
He was this refined, graceful public figure. He spent his evenings contemplating the universe in a serene bamboo grove in Kyoto with his brilliant wife and research partner Keiko Yamasuki.
Right, he was the architect of faith. And because he wasn't a traditional military mind, he recognized early on that humanity's primary vulnerability wasn't just technological. It was psychological.
He recognized it, sure, but his first instinct was still technological. Let's remember, his initial plan was to artificially boost human intelligence.
True, he wanted to evolve our brains.
Yeah, so we could figure a way out of the crisis. But because the alien Sophons, those microscopic supercomputers sent by the Trisolarans, had completely locked down all fundamental physics on Earth, any kind of quantum-level engineering to boost intelligence was just rendered impossible.
It was a dead end.
This is where the nightmare really begins.
See, I wouldn't call it a nightmare at all. I would call it a desperate pivot in a completely unwinnable scenario. They discovered that human thought and memory actually operate on a quantum level, not just the molecular one. That was a revolutionary leap in neuroscience.
It was a leap. Yeah, but look at the profound irony of what he did with that discovery. Think about what quantum mechanics implies. It is the physics of probability, right? Of uncertainty, multiple possibilities existing all at once.
Sure, the classic Schrodinger's cat concept.
Exactly. It is, conceptually, the scientific basis for human free will. Our minds are not fixed tracks. They are open possibilities. Yet Hines used this profound discovery of quantum consciousness to build a machine that enforces absolute classical determinism.
Well, he mapped the exact dynamic pattern of neurons firing when the brain registers a statement as true. And then he built the mental seal to forcefully stamp that pattern onto any proposition. He took a mind built on infinite quantum possibilities and just collapsed it permanently into a single, unchangeable state.
That is a very poetic way to frame it. But you are romanticizing the quantum possibilities of the human mind during, literally, a war of extermination.
Romanticizing? I'm talking about basic cognitive freedom, I know. But the reality is that the human mind, in its natural, uncollapsed state, was failing. Tremendously. Look at the psychology of the crisis era. Humanity was paralyzed by defeatism. General Chang Weezy called our psychology the brain of primitive man.
Right, because we didn't evolve for this.
Exactly. We evolved to run away from a tiger in the bushes, not to process a slow-moving, unstoppable alien armada that wouldn't arrive for 4 centuries. Our minds were just not equipped for that scale of existential dread. Hines knew that traditional persuasion wouldn't work. So the mental seal wasn't malicious. It was an evolutionary prosthetic.
An evolutionary prosthetic implies it helps you function normally. This machine removed the capacity to function dynamically.
How so?
Let me explain how this actually operates mechanistically, because we really shouldn't just talk about it as some abstract concept of belief. Think of the human brain like an open-source operating system.
Okay.
It constantly takes in new user data. So a victory in a skirmish, a new technological breakthrough, a setback, a loss, and it dynamically updates the system's output. We feel hope or we feel fear based on the actual evidence we process.
Right. Standard psychological response.
Yes, but Hines didn't just give his users a pessimistic outlook. By using the mental seal, he permanently changed the human firmware to read-only.
Meaning no matter what new data came in, the output was locked.
Exactly. He locked the output on one single biological imperative: despair. We are going to lose. I mean, if humanity suddenly developed a miraculous, fleet-destroying weapon the very next day, the imprinted soldiers would look at that weapon, understand its power intellectually, and their brain would still mechanically output, "We are going to lose."
Wow.
That isn't a prosthetic. That is cognitive petrification. You're taking a dynamic thinking human being and turning them into a biological machine. It's like a pilot who physically paralyzes the passengers so they won't panic during turbulence. I mean, sure, the plane might land safely, but the passengers have been reduced to mere cargo. Military chaplains build faith through reason and morale. The mental seal surgically removes the capacity for independent thought.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You call it cognitive petrification, and you use this pilot analogy, but consider the environment they were operating in. The Earth's governments, the Planetary Defense Council, were already engaging in a massive, systemic form of mind control.
You mean the anti-escapism laws?
Yes, they had outlawed escapism, the idea of building ships and fleeing the solar system. It was considered a crime against humanity to even suggest running away. The state was forcing a toxic, compulsory optimism on everyone.
That's a bit of an exaggeration, isn't it?
Not at all. They were mandating that society believe in an ultimate victory against an enemy whose basic probes could outmaneuver our fastest ships. Society's open-source operating system, to use your analogy, was being fed fabricated data to force an output of false hope. Hines simply recognized that this societal delusion was going to get every single human being killed. He used a more efficient tool to break through a societal delusion.
But society's mandated optimism, as flawed as it was, still allowed for internal doubt. People could question it in the quiet of their own minds. The mental seal surgically removed the biological capacity for doubt.
Because doubt in a survival scenario is fatal. Look, Hines understood that the only mathematically viable strategy for the continuation of the human species was escapism. We had to run.
Okay, but he lied to everyone to do it.
Because he couldn't advocate for that publicly without being tried for treason. He used the only blind spot the Trisolarans and the UN had, the internal landscape of the human brain. The Sophones could read every hard drive, hear every whispered conversation, see every blueprint on Earth.
Right, they were omnipresent.
But they couldn't read a mind. So, by publicly claiming the mental seal was designed to implant absolute faith in victory, he got the funding to build his faith center. But secretly, he changed the code.
Changing a positive sign to a negative sign?
Exactly. So the machine actually implanted unshakable defeatism. He created a secret class of soldiers driven by an undeniable biological imperative to flee.
And we have to talk about the profound cruelty of that deception. I mean, think about the volunteers at the Faith Center. Do you remember the 4 young Space Force officers who came to him?
I do, yes.
They were completely exhausted by the existential dread of the Trisolaran crisis. They came to Hines desperately seeking an anchor. They voluntarily sat in that chair, fully expecting to be given the psychological strength to fight for Earth, to protect their families.
They wanted a quick fix.
And instead, Hines betrayed them on the most intimate level possible. He secretly injected them with a terrifying, inescapable despair. He forced them to know with biological certainty that their world was going to burn, and they were completely powerless to stop it.
He gave them realism. He stripped away the comforting lie.
He gave them psychological torture. Because society had completely outlawed escapism, these imprinted soldiers couldn't exactly talk about their newfound absolute defeatism. They were forced to live a double life.
True, it was a heavy burden.
Heavy? They had to spend decades hiding their despair from their commanders, their spouses, their children. They were trapped in their own minds, bearing a secret that isolated them from the rest of the human race.
Yes, it was an immense, isolating burden. But that secret burden was the very mechanism of their salvation. How else do you build an escape fleet in a society that will execute you for trying?
I don't know. Maybe through actual human persuasion.
That would have taken too long, and the Sophons would have caught it. You seed a hidden class of people whose very survival instinct is now tied to fleeing Earth. These imprinted soldiers infiltrated the military hierarchy over centuries. They quietly moved resources, subtly shifted policies. Hines took the burden of being history's greatest deceiver so that humanity might have a sliver of a chance. You focus on the individual psychological discomfort of those soldiers, but I am looking at the macro-level survival of the species.
Psychological discomfort is an astonishing understatement. Let's look at Hines's own early testing of the machine to understand what we're really talking about here.
The water test.
Right, the water test. He forced himself to believe a completely false proposition, that water is toxic. Now, he knew intellectually, chemically, that water was essential for biological life.
Right.
But the machine completely bypassed his intellect. When he tried to take a sip of water, his nervous system reacted as if he were drinking pure poison.
Which is incredible.
It's horrifying. He required 2 months of intensive, agonizing psychotherapy just to be able to drink a glass of water without experiencing extreme psychological distress. That is the level of absolute visceral horror he inflicted on those soldiers. It's not just a pessimistic attitude, it is a fundamental rewiring of reality.
Which perfectly proves my point about why it was necessary.
How does that prove your point?
The Trisolaran threat was so overwhelming that a mere pessimistic attitude wouldn't have been enough to sustain a centuries-long covert operation. A normal human mind would eventually cave to the immense social pressure to conform to the state-mandated optimism. Hines realized that to execute a multi-generational survival strategy like escapism, you needed a foundation that wouldn't waver with the daily news cycle or societal pressure.
But his plan to program humans like software was fundamentally flawed because humans aren't just code. You cannot seamlessly fake human hope. The way his plan ultimately collapsed proves that. Let's talk about Keiko Yamasuki, his wife, who ultimately exposed him as his wall breaker.
Ah, Keiko. That is undeniably one of the most tragic moments in the entire history of the crisis.
It is. And it's tragic because of how intimate the betrayal was. She didn't need to break into the supercomputer to figure out his deception.
No, she didn't.
She didn't hack the system to find the negative sign in the code. She figured it out through human connection. She just looked into the eyes of the imprinted soldiers at the Faith Center. And what did she see?
She saw the truth.
She saw the exact same lonely, inescapable despair that she'd seen in her own husband's eyes during their quiet moments together in the bamboo grove in Kyoto. The emotional weight of that engineered despair leaked out. It was literally written on their faces. Hines underestimated the profound, intuitive connection between human beings, specifically the connection he shared with his own wife. He thought he could math his way out of human nature, but the humanity he tried to suppress is exactly what exposed him.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered the aftermath? It exposed his method, yes, but the exposure of the plan doesn't actually negate its immense effectiveness. Keiko's reveal was dramatic, and it destroyed their marriage. But look at the historical outcome.
The outcome where the UN shut him down?
Even after Hines was exposed at the United Nations, the mere possibility that the imprinted had survived and multiplied over the centuries created a massive, lasting legacy. The military was terrified. They had to constantly second-guess their own ranks, wondering who was secretly an escapist.
So he introduced crippling paranoia into the military.
That paranoia kept the idea of fleeing alive in the shadows. But more importantly, we have to look at the ultimate vindication of Hines's worldview. Let's fast forward decades later, during the Doomsday Battle.
When the human combined fleet was destroyed,
Not just destroyed, effortlessly annihilated by a single Trisolaran probe, the droplet.
Right.
And what happened to Earth's society in the immediate aftermath of that battle, when the truth finally hit?
The entire world suffered a catastrophic mass mental breakdown.
Exactly. Because society's mandated optimism was like a giant glass bridge. It looked beautiful, it allowed people to walk forward, but it was incredibly brittle. The moment it took a real impact from the Trisolaran droplet, it shattered completely.
Yeah, it was absolute chaos.
The neighborhood official who had been fabricating fake news of human victories for Hines completely lost his mind when reality hit. The general public regressed to a state of hysterical, riotous panic. The cognitive dissonance was so sharp, it broke the collective psyche of the human race.
I see where you're going with this.
Where was Hines during this global breakdown? Hines was perfectly sane. His engineered defeatism, the very thing you call cognitive petrification, acted as a concrete bunker for the mind. It was dark, it was ugly, but it survived the impact. The false hope is what actually destroyed humanity's mental state when the bubble burst. Hines's approach, brutal as it was the only psychologically stable framework for dealing with the reality of the dark forest. He was proven right. The universe is hostile, and optimism is a fatal flaw.
I understand the contrast you are drawing, and it's a really powerful image. The brittle glass bridge versus the concrete bunker. But you are conflating being right about the outcome with being right about the method.
I don't think those can be separated in survival.
Yes. Hines correctly predicted the technological gap. He correctly predicted the human fleet would burn. But his method of coping with that truth was to permanently mutilate the human mind. Let's go back to the UN hearing, where Keiko publicly exposes him. This is the moment that truly cements the horror of his actions for me.
Okay.
When he was confronted by the Global Assembly with his deception, he openly admitted what he had done. And when the delegates asked him if he repented for taking away the free will of those soldiers, what did he say?
He said that he couldn't repent.
Right. He couldn't repent. Not that he wouldn't, but that he was biologically incapable of it. Because he had used the mental seal on himself, he had implanted his own mind with the absolute, unshakable belief that his Wallfacer plan was entirely correct.
He locked his own output.
He trapped himself in his own deception. He became a god of his own making. And as he noted, God cannot repent. He completely destroyed his own moral agency. If we strip away free will, the ability to change our minds, the capacity to feel genuine remorse or authentic hope, what exactly are we preserving? If the only way to save humanity is to turn us into biological machines that happen to share human DNA, then we've already lost. Hines himself is the tragic endpoint of this logic.
See, you see a man who destroyed his moral agency. I see a man who sacrificed it for the greater good. There is a profound difference. Hines wasn't a sociopath. As we established, he was a deeply refined, thoughtful neuroscientist. He knew exactly what the moral cost of his actions would be.
Then why do it?
Because he knew the guilt of deceiving his wife, of betraying those young volunteers, would be too immense for a normal human mind to bear. It would have driven him to suicide, or it would have made him confess before the plan could take root.
So he forced himself to believe he was right just to avoid the guilt?
He sealed his own mind with the conviction of his rightness to ensure he would carry the burden to the very end. It is an act of supreme, agonizing self-sacrifice. He gave up his own peace of mind, his beautiful relationship with Keiko, and his own moral flexibility, all to plant a single seed of survival. He took the sins of the world onto his own shoulders.
That's quite a biblical framing.
Keiko, despite her brilliance, was still bound by the outdated morality of a pre-crisis world. She couldn't make the leap that Hines made. Hines understood that the universe doesn't care about our ethics, our consent, or our free will. It only cares about who survives and who doesn't. Bill Hines looked into that abyss, realized we were entirely unprepared, and forged a psychological shield the only way he knew how.
Well, I think this is the crux of our disagreement, isn't it? From my perspective, Bill Hines remains a profoundly tragic, cautionary figure. He was a brilliant intellect who allowed the sheer, terrifying scale of the crisis to erode his fundamental ethical boundaries. In his desperation to save the physical continuation of the species, he committed a crime against human consciousness itself. He prioritized mere biological survival over the essence of what makes a human life worth living: our agency, our ability to dynamically reason through evidence, and our capacity for authentic, hard-won hope. The mental seal didn't save humanity. It just reduced people to automated vessels of despair.
And to me, Bill Hines was the ultimate pragmatic visionary. He was a man who clearly saw the inescapable reality of Earth's massive technological disadvantage and realized that false hope would be our total undoing. By bearing the immense emotional burden of deceiving the entire world and betraying the woman he loved, he planted the crucial seeds for humanity's eventual escape. He was willing to be cast as history's greatest villain if it meant giving our species a biological imperative to survive among the stars. He mercy-killed a delusion to save a species.
Well, while we fundamentally disagree on his legacy and whether his actions were justified, I think we completely converge on the terrifying mechanics of his invention. The concept of the mental seal, a machine that can literally rewrite reality in the firmware of the brain with the flip of a positive or negative sign, is one of the most chilling concepts to emerge from the crisis era.
It truly is. The way he weaponized quantum neuroscience to create a prison of classical determinism is brilliant, but undeniably terrifying. And I think we also have to agree on the deep, lingering sorrow of his character. The image of Hines living a lie, staring into the eyes of Keiko and that Kyoto bamboo grove, carrying a secret that isolated him from the entire human race, it makes him an incredibly complex and melancholic figure in our history.
It really does. He wasn't a monster who enjoyed his power. He was a man crushed by the weight of his own intellect. And that shows the value of examining these historical crises from multiple perspectives. The line between salvation and mind control is razor thin. For anyone listening who wants to dive deeper into the ethics of survival and the limits of the human mind, the source material offers so much more to explore.
The history of the Wallfacers is full of these impossible no-win choices.
Indeed it is. It brings us back to where we started, the surgeon of the mind. Bill Hines made his incision, he removed the hope, and he left no visible scar. But the phantom pain of that operation echoed across centuries, leaving us to wonder, if you have to cut away the human spirit to save the human body, was the operation truly a success?